Gateway phones. We've got the CCX 350 poly non-touch, audio codes 435, 436 non-touch, gigaset decked. Avaya has finally joined the game. Avaya is near and dear to my heart because I grew up with Avaya. That was my first PBX I worked on. So we have the Avaya J1XX series that are going to be able to go through the SIP gateway. And we'll have SIP gateway support for GCC. In March, we just got it. That is not including GCC high, just GCC. We'll also have overhead paging with SIP gateway. And we're finally going to certify Android 12 operating system for our Teams devices. Yay! Coming in second half of this year. So what are we doing? What have we done? This is a coming soon slide. We have the lightweight meeting experience coming soon. Right now, we already have lightweight calling experience. So what's lightweight mean? Lightweight calling. So lightweight is basically a way that we have slimmed down the amount of memory and CPU usage that our Teams app uses on these devices for the smaller common area phones or anything that's just a smaller form factor type of phone that may not have as much hardware resources, CPU, and RAM. We've simplified navigation and redesigned the dial pad for heavy calling users. And we are soon going to be able to manage our devices with the Android AOSP management solution in Intune. AOSP stands for Android Open Source Project. So that's a different kind of platform registration that we don't use that today in Intune. We use Android Device Administrator for Intune when we're registering our devices. And that's been deprecated forever, seems, is what Google keeps telling everyone. So it's really great that we're now going to be able to get rid of all of those Android Device Administrator platform registrations in Intune and use the AOSP type of registration. The Teams Shared Device License coming soon will also be able to, you'll be able to license mobile devices that have the Teams mobile client on them. So this could be the new Teams phone mobile, or it could be just a regular cell phone that doesn't have a SIM card that you have the Teams client on that you're just using for retail offices or branch offices to use walkie-talkie or just basic peer-to-peer calling. Best practices for the Teams devices. We have, we're always telling people to use configuration profiles in Teams Admin Center because you can do a good amount of administration with them and keep your configuration standard throughout the organization. So we have enabled the daily restart in the configuration profile. You can kind of see that right here at the bottom, and I'll show that live when I do the demo later. You've got three options. When daily, which you schedule at a time for every phone to reboot automatically. As needed, which gets decided by the Teams app or Teams Admin Center, Teams app on the phone or Teams Admin Center. And then never. You never want the phone to reboot. So you can choose that when you push out that configuration profile. And soon, I don't have a date, but soon we're going to have a different option when we're doing automatic firmware updates. So we'll have the validation option, which is immediately, as soon as possible, when we release new firmware into Teams Admin Center, when we publish that, it will download that onto your phone if you have the validation mode set for your automatic updates. Then there's the general mode, which is default, which is deferred by 30 days. Do you have a question?
Yeah, on the restarts, what's the, is
The question was, does it require manual user intervention to log the phone back in? No, it does not. It is just a Teams app restart. Yeah. Mm-hmm. And then the final option for the automatic firmware update is deferred by 90 days. We would recommend something like that for your C-level folks. And we don't want you to roll out these updates to all the devices at the same time. Please don't do that. That could cause an outage. So we want you to roll it out in phases. Please, pick your IT staff first, and then your power users second. Something new that is coming soon also is virtual front desk. And what we're seeing on the screen here is a neat display. So the hardware is the neat display. You walk up to the device and you press the call the receptionist button. It then calls the person you have specified, and it automatically turns on video so that you can then talk to the receptionist if it's not a physical receptionist there when you're trying to access a building. From an administrative look on the device itself, these are the admin settings on the device. We would go into Teams admin settings. We would have the ability to configure a contact, toggle the front desk user, or toggle the virtual front desk on, configure the contact, and then it restarts the device and then puts it into the virtual front desk mode. And also coming in the future, we're going to have this in Teams Admin Center. So we'll have the enable virtual front desk here. And once we enable the virtual front desk, we have the ability to set a contact. We search for the contact, whoever that is, the front desk or security desk or whoever you want this to connect to. And then you can also set the display message. So the display message is what you would see on the screen, like how we saw over here, right at the top, welcome to Artemis campus. And all that can be pushed out with a configuration profile. So the licensing changes for common area devices has changed a lot in the past year. What have we done? First, we changed the name of the common area phone license. Now it's called Teams Shared Device License. We added an Exchange Online Plan 2 license to this license bundle. We also added an Intune license to the license bundle. We've also enforced the common area phone interface onto the phone. So that is the equivalent of this PowerShell command here, new Teams IP phone policy, common area phone, sign-in mode. You want common area phone sign-in mode. So that actually pushes down the common area user interface onto the phone. And there's two versions of the common area phone interface. I'll show you that in a second. And then also we've added the lightweight calling experience toggle on and off, which is under settings on the phone itself, under the calling menu. The advanced calling features for the common area phones is also new. This is something that can be turned on directly on the device, or it can be turned on through a configuration profile. You need this minimum version of the Teams app running on the device, which, if you're not aware, the end of the version number is actually the year, the month, the day, and then whatever version we decided to give it. So that was 2022 in June, so I think we're all good as long as you're updated to at least that version. When you're in this advanced calling mode on this common area phone, you have the ability for call park, voicemail, call queues and auto attendance, group call pickup, and call forwarding settings. Now, why would anybody ever want voicemail on a common area phone? I don't know. There actually is a use case. So this is what the difference that it looks like when you turn on common area mode. Advanced calling versus the basic calling. So this one is what you get with basic. You get a dial pad, and you can search, and that's about it. When you have advanced calling turned on, it looks very similar to a regular user interface mode. You've got the phone calls, you have recent, and you've got voicemail. You can search for people, you can go to settings, all of those things. And before we get into that, I want to show you a little bit more about that. So when you are in advanced calling mode, there's one thing missing from this menu. We do get hot desking, which is neat. Advanced calling mode gives you hot desking. Everybody wants that on a common area phone. But you don't have the ability to connect to a device. And that connect to a device is the second piece of doing better together over Bluetooth. So we can't do that when we're using a Teams shared device license. We're also missing a lot of settings in here. So we have to go one level deeper. And when we go one level deeper, we still don't have those normal settings like call forwarding, display settings. We have to go into admin-only mode. And admin-only mode makes you put in a password. So if you're giving out these phones to users with these Teams shared device licenses, and they can't control their own settings on the phones, they can't set their own lock pin, they can't do the things that normal users can do, which is in all of these things in this menu under admin only. All this is available to a user when they're using a regular user license. Team shared device license locks this down. So admin only, and which IT people would have to go and turn that on or give the users the password for the admin on the device. No IT person wants to do that. Under the calling menu, here is our advanced calling option. So that's what gives us this interface. We can turn it on and off directly on the phone. One other thing about this screenshot here, if you don't have the account enabled for enterprise voice, you won't have call forwarding or voicemail or this voicemail greetings area. That all disappears if the account you're signed in with is not enterprise voice enabled. It's there in the Teams client on the desktop. It is not there on the phone. And just a little bit more about what you get with advanced calling. You've got your recent, you've got your favorites, you've got your voicemail, everything you would have on a normal phone, minus those few things I mentioned. And then the walkie-talkie. All right, let's go back to this. So what do we recommend for configuration on a common area phone? There's calling policies, specific calling policies you want to think about. When you're thinking about a common area phone, what is it? It's a phone in an area that many people are going to traffic through. Anybody can use that phone, hence common area, right? So if somebody picks up that phone and makes an outbound call, do you really want them to receive a call waiting beep? No. So you would want to turn on busy, so when they're making an outbound call, they're not getting that call waiting. You also don't really want voicemail on these common area phones unless your IT staff is going to go check those voicemails, delete those voicemails, do something with those voicemails. And you probably want to turn on the SIP device option because a lot of these common area phones are SIP gateway devices. For voicemail, if you do have an option, or if you have a scenario like a security desk, that's a totally valid reason to have a common area phone with voicemail. Lots of people, lots of security officers coming in and out would probably have advanced calling mode on. So then you would want that phone specifically to have voicemail and be using a team shared device license. And then you would start to think about, what do you want for the voicemail policy? You probably want a call park policy, because anybody anywhere can pick up the phone and say, so-and-so, especially if there's paging, like Home Depot, or any retail establishment that has paging. Call park is good for that. And then caller ID policy, you definitely want to replace the caller ID and calling name, because if anyone makes an outbound call, this will reduce the spam and reduce the accidental dialbacks and accidental voicemails left on common area phones. This just helps. And lastly, the emergency calling policy. You definitely want to have one of those set for all common area phones, so that a security person or receptionist gets notified if somebody calls 911. Okay, let's go look at it. All right, so first here we're in the configuration profile. We've got our restart teams automatically right here, set to daily. We've got our advanced calling turned on. So I'm going to push this one out to all of my common area phones. And nothing else really that important for common area phones here. When we're looking at our common area calling policy, this right here, this setting, is the one that will stop the cloud voicemail system from even picking up the phone. So if you want to just have it ring no answer, and don't give anybody the ability to leave a voicemail ever, just set that to not enabled, and you're good to go. Now, if you don't have an exchange license, if you happen to disable that exchange license on your team's shared device license bundle that you have associated to your account, cloud voicemail is still going to answer the phone, and it's not going to be able to leave a message anywhere because there's no mailbox. So that's where this would come in, especially. And some of these other things, you don't need web PSTN calling. Definitely want busy on busy. You don't need some of this stuff. Don't turn on these features for common area phones. It just doesn't make any sense. So that is the recommendation for calling policy. Call park is super easy. It's like an on-off switch. On, set it to however many. Caller ID policy, you want it to look something like this. So you're replacing the caller ID name, calling party name, and you're replacing it with the main number of the company. So if somebody sees that, they can just call back the main number. And you would associate that to the user account that is signing into the common area phone. Emergency call policy, pretty easy. Notification only. Conference in but are muted, and conference in but are unmuted. This has a 50-person limit. So if you're assigning a group here, like I have, my emergency calling group, there cannot be more than 50 people in that group. If there is more than 50 people, it will choose the first 50, and it will notify the first 50. Also, if you choose conference in but are muted, there is no way to unmute that, even with digits, like *6 or whatever. You can't unmute yourself. And voicemail policies. This is my favorite, right? The typical voicemail policy is set to 300 seconds. That is 5 minutes. Who wants a 5-minute voicemail? No. I don't know why they did. They used to do that in Exchange Unified Messaging too. So for common area phones, if you did want to have voicemail, I would recommend you set that to 60 seconds and maybe turn on some of these other settings for profanity. And you don't need call answer rules on a common area phone. So that's also enabled by default, but you should turn that off.
All right, so what happens if someone decides to start meeting with family? You got it switched to block.
It stars it out in the transcription.
Oh.
Yeah, it just makes like the first letter and then *****. Yeah.
They just want to make sure you understand what the first letter is. And then you can fill in the blank. That's right. We're not going to say it, but we're going to allude to what it actually was.
Right.
Does the profanity work based on the language that you guys have, right? Like UK versus US versus...
That's a great question. I'm not sure about that. I'll have to test that out. Okay, so let's get into some conditional access with these Teams devices. Now, what I'm about to say next is not specific to common area phones. And some of this is a repeat from last year because everybody needs to keep this in the back of their mind. This is a huge problem with Teams phones. So first, we're going to go over the sign-in flow. This is what happens inside your Teams phone. You start at the Teams app, and the second step is after you type in your password, username and password, maybe the device code if you're using the browser to sign in. Then it goes to the company portal app, which is another app installed on the phone. Inside the company portal app, it is also tied in with the broker authenticator. Broker authenticator is specific to Azure AD. So broker authenticator communicates with our Azure AD token issuing service. It says, "Can I get a token, please?" Then token issuing service says, "Sure. You've passed all of the conditional access rules, so I'll give you a token." Great. Now our broker authenticator goes to Azure AD device registration service and tries to do a workplace join. Workplace join is the way it adds a device object into Azure AD, similar to the way a Windows laptop would add a device object, except that is a hybrid device object. The Android devices only do a workplace join type of device object. So once we get our device object in Azure AD, we go on to the next step. Now we're done with the broker authenticator. We're back in the company portal app, and the company portal app is talking to Intune now. So now we're going to do our Intune enrollment. Once we do our Intune enrollment, that's going to create a second device object called an Intune enrollment object. Once we have that completed, we go back around to the Teams app, and we do the provisioning with our admin agent. Admin agent is another part of the Teams app that's installed on the phone, and the admin agent provisions a third device object in Teams Admin Center. The admin agent on the phone is what is responsible for talking to TAC, Teams Admin Center. So anytime you do anything with Teams Admin Center, pushing anything to the device configuration profile, pushing out firmware, downloading device logs, anything you're doing in TAC, the admin agent has to be communicating with TAC to make that happen. So with conditional access, we have two properties that we are really concerned about. The is compliant attribute, the attributes. Is compliant attribute and the is managed attribute. So is compliant is managed by Intune, not Azure AD. But conditional access checks for that every single time the device requests a token, which happens all the time. Like, I don't know, every 15 minutes to every hour, depending on the situation. So we really need to be concerned about getting that attribute populated. And when a user attempts to authenticate in Azure AD, it uses something called the device code flow. So if you are looking at the device and you see that refresh code button, and you're pressing that refresh code button, and it's not giving you a code, that's the device code flow failing for some reason or another. The token issuing service, ESTS, is the acronym we use for token issuing service. It's checking to see if the device is managed and checking to see if it is compliant. Compliance equals true. Validation of these properties happens, blah, blah. That part's not important. On every existing conditional access policy that has unsupported settings for the team's devices, you're going to need to have a device filter. It will make your life so much better. And having this conversation with every customer everywhere is what we're doing still. What I told everyone last year is this. When the device starts to enroll or you sign into a device for the very first time, even after a factory default, it goes through this require compliance and conditional access, and conditional access gives it a pass and says, okay, well, this is your first time, so go on through and we'll give you a little bit of time to get registered, to get all your devices provisioned properly, and then we'll check you again. Chicken and egg scenario, right? So we were trying to prevent that. That was supposed to be built in. What we have found is that, I'll come back to that one. That doesn't work in all situations. So our new recommendation for device filters is that we're adding display name to the device filter along with manufacturer and model number. So what that does is when the device first registers itself into Azure AD, the device display name, say it's a Poly CCX 500. It would be Poly CCX 500 for about 30 to 60 seconds. Then the display name gets changed to something random that has the date and time in it. Username _ Android _ date and time. So we can't do display name after the provisioning has finished, but we can catch it during those first 30 to 60 seconds. And conditional access can say, oh yeah, this display name matches, I'm gonna let it through. That gives it time to, gives Intune and Azure AD time to fully populate the manufacturer and model number attributes, which is what we need for the continued requests for tokens, because that's what conditional access will check for, and it'll match on those after those first 30 to 60 seconds. But manufacturer and model number attributes are very slow to get populated. They're not like change your password and automatically you can sign in with your new password. That's like #1 replication, right? Model number and manufacturer is like one of the slowest to replicate. One of the other things that is changed in conditional access is we are moving the client apps, require approved client apps to the app protection policies. And this is, like it says, coming in March 2026. We all have time to migrate this. But be thinking about this. This has always caused us problems with our Teams devices, but now it's going to cause us more problems with our Teams devices because of app protection policies. So let's take a look at that. So over here in conditional access, everybody's got all these existing policies created for their laptops and cell phones and things. This one is configured for Android devices. Great. But it says only cell phones. Guess what? That's not going to only affect cell phones. That's going to affect our Teams devices too. And it's requiring client apps, so that's going to be a problem for us. And our grant controls are set to require approved client apps. That's also going to be a problem for us. That last screenshot that I talked about, this is what it's being migrated to. So that require approved client apps is all going to get moved to require app protection policy. And just about a week ago, I had a customer with 10,000 phones that checked this box on one of their policies, and all of their phones signed out. Yes, it was very fun. Most of them recovered after they unchecked the box and replication happened, but it wasn't all of them. They did have to sneaker net around. So be careful with require app protection policies. And just an up-close view of how we want our device filter. You may be able to make it a little bit neater than this, but you always want to use the or. For the operator, you never want to use equals. Never, never, ever, ever. Sometimes our manufacturers like to put a space at the end of the manufacturer name or the model number name, or maybe a space at the beginning. We can't see it. So don't use equals, use anything else but equals. And then finally, the order of which these settings are going to apply. If you have a device filter configured, it is not going to check, this policy is not going to check any of these other conditions. Nothing else here. And it's also not going to check for any access controls for grant or session. So everything is safe when you're using a filter for devices. If you have a customer or you don't want to use a filter for devices and you just want to use trusted locations and you're like, I have my devices in a trusted location. Nothing should be affecting these devices. It's kind of true. Trusted locations will stop the grant and the session access controls. So anything you have configured in there will not be applied to the device object. However, it does not stop any of the other conditions. Doesn't stop conditional access from checking for any of these other conditions. So if I'm in a trusted location and I also have client apps configured in here, that's not good for us. That's not good for our Teams phones. So we still want to use a device filter, but in some cases you can get away with trusted locations. It really just depends on the configuration. Every customer's configuration is different on every policy. Sometimes they have 10, sometimes they have 100. Okay, a little bit of Intune. This is what we had: Android Device Administrator and Android Enterprise. Android Enterprise was for mobile devices. Android Device Administrator platform is for our Teams devices. That is current. That is how it is now. We're adding the Android AOSP as a third to this. and we're going to be removing the Android device administrator. The enrollment flow is the user logs into the Teams device, authenticates with Azure AD, like we saw with the flow during sign-in, checks for the license, checks to see if it has an Intune license. If it has an Intune license, it starts the enrollment, registers the device in Azure AD device registration service, device registers with Intune, and provides a certificate, and Intune checks the enrollment restriction policy. And devices check in to Intune and start being provided with compliance policies or other Intune policies. If you have conditional access that has this setting, require device to be marked as compliant, and you don't have an Intune license on that account, the device cannot be marked as compliant ever because Intune can't check for its compliance because you don't have an Intune license. So you need to have an Intune license if you have this checkbox checked in any of the conditional access policies. That way, the device will enroll in Intune, Intune will check for compliance, and then provide that information back to conditional access that the device is or isn't compliant. If the device gets marked as non-compliant because one of these settings, unsupported settings in conditional access, enrollment will fail. Depending on what part of the enrollment fails, the device object may automatically get deleted. And you may need to factory default the device, and there's a whole lot of things that go along after that. All right, a little bit of troubleshooting. When you see this error message, couldn't connect to workplace join, try again, or contact your admin. Anybody know what causes this? Yeah.
Most likely network mismatch.
That's one of them, yes. It's either the phone cannot connect to Teams because it either has no network connection or just firewalls blocking it, might be on the wrong VLAN. The second one is if you have a web proxy. If the device has to go through a web proxy and you're not allowing all of the URLs to be communicated with for Teams. And the third one, and this is 99% of the time, it's a conditional access policy that's causing this. And it means that you cannot register the Azure AD device object. So when you see this, I would say the first place to look is conditional access. When you see this next one, device does not meet your organization compliance requirements. Compliance usually means Intune because Intune has the compliance policy. So for that one, I would go check in Intune to make sure that you're allowing devices to enroll. And this last one is pretty easy. Could not enroll in Intune due to the device limit. You have a device limit in Azure AD, but you also have a device limit in Intune. And in Intune, the device limit is maxed out at 15. So that's not talking about your Azure AD device object limit. That one is talking about your Intune device limit. So that's really an enrollment object limit. Something we can do for the unsupported settings in conditional access is we have a script for this.